Hello and welcome to the Chaffin Church podcast. My name is Ryan Thompson, and this is going to be a little bit of a different episode today because this is my first solo episode. My usual co-host, Pastor Marty Holman, has the week off. We're going to miss him today, and this will probably be a little bit of a shorter episode than normal because I have nobody to create banter with here, but I will do my best. And I hope you're ready to take the podcast out to a bar and buy it its first beer, because this is also Chaffin Church Podcast's 21st episode. They grow up so fast. Speaking of growing up, for the Chaffin Good News this week, we have two birthdays. Al Dancy and my co-host, Pastor Marty Holman. They're both on the leadership team here at the church, and we all love them and appreciate them both very much. They must have decided to throw, some sort of rager without me, so I'm assuming we won't be seeing them this weekend, but we hope they have some awesome birthdays. Some other good news. My sister, Johanna Thompson, Johanna Sabula, got married this weekend, so a huge congratulations to her and Peter Sabula on their special day. All right, now let's get into the meat of the episode. The meat. Yeah, sorry, I don't really know how to act without Marty here, so I'm going to be honest. I mean, first of all, Marty is the one who plans our episodes, so or at the very least, he comes up with our episode outlines. So it's a lot of work putting this stuff together, and I knew that before, but now that I have to do it, it's one of those things where I'm realizing it even more. So kudos to Marty for doing that most weeks, for real. Thank you, Marty. All right, now let's dive into our topic for the day. Let's talk about eschatology. Hello, are you still there? Well, I'm glad you are, because, for a lot of people, and with good reason, they would hop in their car and just drive away from someone who started a discussion that way, like, let's talk about eschatology, and then the other person, you just hear, peeling rubber, and you just see the tail lights and a puff of smoke. So if you've never heard this word eschatology before, basically it just means the study of the end times. So when people talk about eschatology in a Christian context, most of the time they're just referring to Revelation and Jude and these select other texts from throughout the Bible about the end of the Bible story. So I'm going to open a seltzer here because my throat's getting dry. Is seltzer not amazing? I love seltzer. I have a bottle of LaCroix here, so free marketing for LaCroix. Normally I would get Polar, but they didn't have that. Oh, that's good. Okay. So again, eschatology, sort of the end of the Bible story, usually people referring to Revelation and Jude and other, there's other examples throughout the Bible that talk about the end. So I want you to just do something for me. Why don't you go ahead and think about the last time you heard someone talk about this, about eschatology. Last time you heard somebody speak about eschatology. Go ahead. I bet what you're thinking of right now is at least somebody saying some pretty weird things, or perhaps, and actually probably, it's probably a weird person saying some weird things, right? That's typically what we think of when we think of people talking about eschatology. So, and our typical reaction as Christians to that is either to say that either A, nothing can be known about the end times, which isn't totally true, or we might also say that whatever happens during these end times, like I love Jesus now, so it doesn't really matter what happens at the end. Also, not entirely true. And so I'm going to give you today, what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why eschatology matters for us today. And that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm also going to try to stay on theme with this. We've been talking about justice lately, which has come out of our discussion on Micah 6:8. So I'm going to try to connect it to justice as much as possible. All right, so here we go. So this first reason why eschatology is important for us to know and to think about today, I think it's going to blow some of your minds like wide open, especially if you're new to listening to the podcast, because we have actually talked about this before. Marty and I have quite a bit. And that reason is this: the kingdom is coming here to this earth. Heaven is coming here to the places where you and I live and work and breathe and tweet and send out Facebook posts and TikToks and whatever else you do, and the places in which we yodel like Marty does regularly. But that heaven is coming here to those places. It's not described as some faraway place that we can go, when we die, really, which is sort of like the traditional medieval view that has come about. But heaven, it's the kingdom of heaven. It's sort of like described as like it's a way of life, and something that we can help to bring here now. Something we can help to bring here now. And then, also in the scriptures, in the final chapter of the last book of the Bible, there's this sort of this final event that we see, and that's that there's this. They call it the New Jerusalem. It's this city, this massive city, being lowered from the clouds, and it's being lowered from the clouds not to some faraway place, but it's being lowered to this earth that we live in here and now. So this very earth that Marty yodels in and that you tweet in and send out TikTok videos in, that is where the New Jerusalem is going to be lowered, and that's sort of like the seminal event of the scriptures. It's literally in the very last chapter of the very last book of the Bible. So isn't that really interesting? Because for so many of us, I think, we've been taught that heaven is some sort of ethereal other place, right? Like it's some place that you die and you are somehow transported to afterwards. And it's not here, right? Never we don't hear that very often that it's here, but this is what the scriptures tell us. There's actually a really great song that Marty and I both love, and we have good memories of. It's called Afterlife by Switchfoot, and some of you probably know it or know of it. And the lyrics to the chorus go like this. We actually used to sing this at Fellowship Church back in the day as a worship song. And the lyrics to half of the chorus go like this: because every day the world is made, a chance to change, but I feel the same. And I wonder why would I wait till I die to come alive? I'm ready now. I'm not waiting for the afterlife. So it's sort of John Foreman, the singer. He's talking about, like, we don't have to even wait until we're dead to sort of experience some of this stuff, and it's coming here. Every day the world is made a chance to change, so I'm ready now. I'm not waiting for the afterlife, right? It's this really kind of cool and epic line. So we know the kingdom of heaven is coming here. That's important. It's sort of earth-shattering, and it changes a lot of the ways that we typically think about heaven. Because if heaven is not sort of this other ethereal place, it does some stuff to what we believe. So why does this matter to the way we view justice and the way that we live now? Well, when we think about, the alternative idea, which is that when we die, we simply escape this earth, our motivation to act justly, in a lot of cases, and really in most cases, it's not as strong because we're not really like connected with that other place, that ethereal place that we're just going to be transported to. Because honestly, like we haven't experienced any of it. Whereas, like when I know that the kingdom of heaven is here and I'm an active participant in continuing to bring it here, I have experienced at least some of it. Of course, I haven't experienced all of it. But, Paul puts it this way in some of his writings. He says, we see now as if through a veil. And I think that's such cool language. So a veil in Paul's day, like it was more like burlap than it was like silk. Like silk was sort of stuck in China at that point. It hadn't really been fully realized and traded well yet. There weren't like these epic trade routes. There are a few, but for the most part, a veil was more like burlap than it was like silk. It was harder to see through than what we conceptualize as a veil. So, in other words, we really can't see a lot of what's going on in the kingdom of God. We really only get this sort of brief glimpse, but we sort of we get these previews every once in a while, right? And we see sort of the contours and the outlines of shapes of like love and justice, and then that final thing in that final city, Jesus dwelling among us. So we get some glimpses of those things. One thing that I've also talked about on the podcast before is this idea of fire insurance. Fire insurance. Now, if you are an insurance salesman and you sell maybe homeowners insurance and it has like a fire part of that insurance policy, I'm not talking about you. This is different, okay? So when I talk about fire insurance when it comes to the way we believe and the way we live out our faiths, I'm talking about this idea that, okay, so heaven is this other ethereal place, so is hell is this other ethereal place, and we go before the judgment throne of God, and we get sorted, and we go to either heaven or hell, and again, they're not here, so we haven't experienced them, like, at all, basically. And so, essentially, the fire insurance theory says, I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure I don't go to the fire, right? So that I don't catch on fire, I don't get sent to hell. And so my faith is now fire insurance because I want to go to heaven, and I'm just going to do whatever I have to do to get there. And then the rest is just like gravy, right? Like there's no extra credit. Like you do what you have to do to get to heaven, and then you're good, right? So you can kind of see why that would be problematic to living justly on this earth. So I'll give you a for instance. So if somebody is into the whole fire insurance theory, why would they take part in any sort of effort to make sure that global warming is not a continuing trend? Like seriously, why do they care? If they're going to heaven in some other place and they only have that desire, to get there and escape the fire, and this earth doesn't matter, then why bother? Like if Jesus is going to come back and just bring us all to some other place, then why does it matter what happens to this earth? Like why would I live in a way that would help the situation if that's sort of just extra credit and I don't have to? So you can kind of see how this would be problematic in a lot of ways, but just a reminder again, in the scriptures, and you can read this. I encourage you to go into the scriptures and read this, by the way. So this is only my first point. I'm going to have two more, but in all three of my points, please go ahead and just crack open Revelation and look at what it's saying about the kingdom. Go ahead and read Revelation 21 when it's talking about the new Jerusalem being lowered from the clouds, right? We're not talking about some other place. We're talking about the kingdom of heaven coming here now, and eventually it will be fully realized. So, all right, that's my first point. I don't want to get too deep into this because we have a limited amount of time on this podcast. Second reason that eschatology should matter to us today with justice in mind is the Antichrist. Now, I mean, if some of you didn't run away when I said, we're going to talk about eschatology, I think the rest of you probably got the urge to run away when I said, let's talk about the Antichrist, right? Because this is weird people central, right? The Antichrist. This is what, the weirdest weird people talk about all the time is the Antichrist. Oh, when is the Antichrist coming? Who is the Antichrist? And there's this sort of obsession with the Antichrist. So I wanna talk about a few things here, but before I really dive into this, I just want to say, including my first point and all points in this podcast, the views that I am about to espouse don't necessarily fully reflect the views of Chaffin Church, and on top of that, they also don't necessarily represent the views of Pastor Marty, the pastor of this church. And then on top of all that, if you believe differently, that's okay. You can believe things differently than I do and still have a faithful witness, okay? So if you believe differently than what I believe about this, that's okay. It's going to be okay. We can poke fun at one another. I'm about to poke fun at you on this podcast, so I probably deserve a little ribbing in return, and that's fine. But so let's get back to it. The Antichrist. Again, the Antichrist matters. This is something that sort of your typical mega churchy movement or health and wealth gospel, they will typically stay away from talking about the Antichrist because it's sort of awkward. And then you have this other group of Christians that do talk about it. And typically these are the fundamentalists, right? These are the people that really are fundamentalists, biblical literalists, people who are very want to take the Bible very, very literally, which is another problem we've spoken about in this podcast before. So sorry, that's a really super long intro. What is the Antichrist? So the Antichrist is both a concept and in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is actually also a character. Okay? Now, why do I use the word character and not the word person? Well, I'm going to use the word character because there's a lot of language in Revelation that sort of indicates that the Antichrist is a personification of an idea. Have you ever heard of the term the embodiment of evil, right? And can a person ever really be the embodiment of all evil? I personally don't think so. I don't think a person can ever be the embodiment of all evil. No matter how bad your boss or your mother-in-law is, I'm sure that they are not the embodiment of all evil. But the Antichrist, it's sort of a similar concept, right? Essentially, Antichrist, from what I've read in Revelation, what I've studied, the Antichrist works better as a concept that has been personified so that the writer can write about it, can write this concept into the story more easily and so that it can be more fully understood. And so just keep that in mind as we're talking. So again, if you believe that the Antichrist is a person, is that wrong or bad? not necessarily, but as long as you also see that Antichrist is not just a specific person that will come someday. Antichrist is a concept as well. It's a pattern of behavior. It's a philosophical concept. And it comes from, contra Christos. It's against the Messiah and this messianic, against the messianic message, against the messianic way. And so really what you're talking about when you're talking about Antichrist, it's against Jesus, it's against Jesus's kingdom that he's bringing here, which is the thing we talked about in the first point. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard the phrase before, like when people are talking about maybe like a war-torn nation, and they talk about something being, or a country, or maybe a province or a city being God forsaken. Have you ever heard this before? So they'll say, "Oh, that war-torn country is God forsaken," or that God forsaken city has so much poverty and so much trouble. And I actually want to applaud. I think a lot of Christians, they hear the term God forsaken and they immediately like tense up and cringe because, traditional Christian belief, or Orthodox Christian belief anyway, has God as omnipresent, right? God can be present everywhere at all times. So when you say a city is God forsaken, it's sort of like, oh, well, how dare you? How dare you say this city is God forsaken? But I want to look at this a little bit of a different way. I kind of want to applaud people's efforts when they say that a city or a nation or a province or whatever, an area is God forsaken, because what they're trying to communicate here is this idea that God is good, and that goodness that they maybe know or at least have heard about is not there, right? And so when they're saying God forsaken, maybe they do, or maybe they don't mean that God is just totally not there or whatever. But what they're really trying to focus in on is that it doesn't feel like God is around. And, I think it's sort of like a misnomer, or like it's not named well, that term. So I've actually been thinking about this. I think a more accurate term might be kingdom forsaken, right? Or kingdom of heaven forsaken. So these are like physical places that exist in time where the kingdom of God is just either not there, or it's not as present there as it should be. But as human beings, we somehow know there is this intrinsic sort of value of goodness that we know should be there, right? Because even non-Christians, even atheists say this term God forsaken sometimes, because we know that there's this goodness, there's something missing, and it has to be fixed. So I think, kingdom forsaken is probably more theologically accurate, because in some of these places, the kingdom is not there as present as it should, in many of these places. So, in places where sex slavery, for instance, is a big deal, those places are, in a very real way, kingdom forsaken. The kingdom is not there as presently as it should be. I think in another very real way, the fact that climate change is happening on Earth, it's throwing things out of whack. Human suffering is happening at a scale because of the weather that we have not seen ever. And in some ways, at least on that topic, our world is kingdom forsaken, and it's our job to sort of bring it back. Another term that Christians often cringe at, I'm going to say it, so if you are very sensitive to, sort of swearing or anything like that, I would encourage you to just skip ahead by 5 minutes here. The other term that I hear a lot that sort of turns Christians off, but again, I sort of want to give credit to people who say this, at least in certain situations, is God damned. God damned. So when people say, God damned, what are they really saying? So when we're thinking of the kingdom, we're thinking kingdom-minded in this episode, right? Something that is God damned is actually something that will be exiled from the kingdom when it is here fully. It won't be there, or we're saying it shouldn't be there once the kingdom is there. And actually, in the book of Revelation, we are told multiple instances where certain behaviors, certain concepts are, and certain people who maybe even don't want to be there, are sort of not allowed into the kingdom at that time when they ask to be admitted. There are concepts, there are things that are God damned. So these are things that they'll just be exiled from the kingdom when it is here fully. And I know, a lot of people use the term God damned inappropriately. So one time I'll say where it is totally inappropriate to use this term is as a pejorative against a person, as an insult against a person. So if you say, hey, that God damned, insert their name here, person, right? Like, we don't get to say who it, or what is ever God damned. That is, we don't have control over the Department of Immigration in God's kingdom. That's not up to us. We don't get to decide who comes in, who goes out, who gets to stay. That is God and specifically Jesus's responsibility. We're told in the New Jerusalem. So keep that in mind. We don't say God damned about people, or especially not groups of people. That's just horrible. But I think about concepts, like clearly sin is God damned, right? Like even the most conservative Christian would say that. But injustice is God damned. We don't want injustice. Will have no place in the new kingdom, right? Slavery will have no place. Slavery is God damned. It has no place in the kingdom when it's fully here. And we could keep going through more and more examples, but and actually, I'll say this, even something a more modern day present one than those examples. Climate change is God damned. God damn climate change. You heard me say it. I'll say it publicly. God damn climate change, because it is causing suffering on a scale that we have not seen before, and that is not something that will be able to enter the kingdom when it's here fully. So, yes. So the Antichrist. So it's tying that all back into the Antichrist. Things that are God forsaken or God damned, they are anti-Christ, right? Hatred and bigotry and climate change and injustice, any sort of injustice, these things are always anti-Christ. That's kind of how the concept works. So whether or not you want to think the Antichrist is some literal individual person, whether that's like a supernatural person or not a supernatural person, that is sort of immaterial to this part of the conversation, because we need to keep an eye on what is Antichrist. Because what is Antichrist is anti-kingdom. And the things that are Antichrist can sometimes, by our will, by our actions, can push the Christ things, the kingdom things, out of a certain place or a certain relationship or a certain, corner of our own minds. We get to decide where the kingdom is in some ways. We are agents of that. of kingdom change. And so we get to decide where the sort of the kingdom of the Antichrist is and isn't, because we also decide where the kingdom of Christ goes and doesn't go in this world. So that's another reason why eschatology is extremely important in today's world. All right, the third and final reason that eschatology should matter to us today, with justice in mind, is that studying the end gives us hope in the now. Studying the end gives us hope in the now. And the reason that I say that is because really it's easy to lose hope. It's very easy to lose hope in this world when things go poorly, and when it sort of seems like the forces of evil and destruction and chaos are on the rise. Even if it's not like global or universal, right? Like it's not happening all over the place. Even if it's in a certain area, it's so easy to lose hope, especially when it's something that affects us directly. Very easy to lose hope. One thing this week that I will admit that I struggled with this week. There was a report that came out this week from the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that basically says, look, world leaders, you have to drastically up your decarbonization efforts, or these consequences for the world will continue to accelerate. Essentially, the report says we are not doing enough to combat climate change. And that's really hard to hear because, with the Paris Climate Accords and everything, it was a little bit of a bright spot when we were sort of coming back to that, and things were sort of starting to take shape. I'm sorry if that's too political. Hopefully it's not too political for you guys. But I think that's just an example of something. It affects everyone, or at least it will affect everyone. And so it's sort of this damning report. Although the panel on climate change, they did say that there is still time to turn this around. At the very least, we can halt climate change, and depending on how technology takes shape over the next, several decades, several centuries, we can probably actually completely turn this around, is what I've read. Another area, that a lot of people lose hope on is rising inequality. We have a lot of economic inequality. Some of that has been proven to be based on race in the previous decades. Again, sorry if that's too political for some of you. One thing that I know conservatives and liberals care about a lot: human trafficking still exists in the world, and every year we get back reports. Some years it's better, some years it's worse, but it is always super distressing to hear that human trafficking is still happening. Much of it is linked to sex slavery. Some of it is linked to forced labor, just slavery as a concept as it's been for many hundreds of years has not gone away because of this. So anyways, these things are disheartening, but studying the end can give us hope. Because here's the thing, remember the last chapter in the Bible, the very last chapter, Revelation chapter 21, and I would encourage you, it's not super long, go ahead and crack open your Bible later, or go on your phone and download the Bible app, the YouVersion Bible app, and just read Revelation 21 in your favorite version. My favorite is the Message version, or MSG. So if you go ahead and download that app on your phone, read Revelation 21, because it is so cool hearing how things are going to end. And if you're not a Christian, this is from the Christian perspective, but how we believe things are going to wrap up, because it's so inspiring. There's this new Jerusalem being lowered from the clouds, and we're told, Jesus will dwell among his people, and there will be no pain. Tears will come to an end, and so many cool and amazing things are going to happen, and all justice will reign. Rivers of justice will flow, we're told elsewhere in the Bible, in this new kingdom. And it really, I'm trying to get emotional here because it is really something to read this and just be inspired. And I know it gives me hope. Like when I read this stuff about climate change and human trafficking and inequality and all the world's problems and all of my problems, by the way, that's part of this too. We know what the end is going to be. We get this preview, and again, as Paul said, it's sort of like seeing through a veil. We can't really. What does it mean for the city of Jerusalem to be lowered from the clouds? How will that work? I don't know. I really don't know. I think anyone who says they know exactly how it's going to work is probably a little bit crazy. But just to know that is in our future is really cool. I just mentioned this a few seconds ago, but if you're not a Christian and you're listening to this, I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the episode, actually. Most of this must sound like pretty weird or really weird. And I get it. Honestly, it sounds a little bit weird to me as I'm saying it in some ways. But, I believe as a Christian that it's weird in all of the right ways. And you know what? I think it motivates us to do good in the world today. So no matter, how you feel about the specifics about any of this, I hope we can find at least some common ground on many of the outcomes of this, because so much good will happen to the world as a result of our eschatology, and especially what we believe about it. Because, look, our actions, our day-to-day actions, they don't just exist in a vacuum. Like what we do today has never been just about today. It's been about the rest of our lives, and specifically about what we believe and why we believe it. Our actions come out of what we believe. And so I just kind of want to wrap up the talk today with that what you believe in general matters, but specifically what you believe about the end. It does matter as a Christian. It's not immaterial. Loving Jesus alone, of course, that's important. That's the most important thing. Having both a personal and corporate together relationship with Jesus through your local church. Those are super, super important. But what you believe about the end, in many ways, will inspire, and it will just inform in general the way that you act on a daily basis as a believer. So please don't cast eschatology aside just because it's the weird uncle that shows up at the party and says strange things. It actually can be very inspiring, and there are a lot of good things that can come out of studying it. Again, I do know it can be, you can sort of get locked into it too much and really go maybe a little bit too far. But at least on a basic level, there are some really cool truths that are wrapped up in our eschatology that are very important and foundational to our faith. So I would encourage you, again, go ahead and read Revelation chapter 21. Start at the end, and then go back and read the rest of it. I also want to recommend 2 books to you. I gotta get this other one here. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to recommend 2 books to you today. The first is called Essential Eschatology. This is a book by one of my seminary professors. His name is John E. Phelan Jr., or we called him J. Phelan at the seminary. So he has written this book. Now, typically when a seminary professor writes a book about eschatology, it's very long. It's full of a ton of big words and everything. There's a little bit of that in here, but for the most part, I think Professor Phelan did a great job of making this accessible to just about anyone that is over a high school reading level. So it's only 180 pages long, and it's not super thick. And even if you only read parts of it, I would highly recommend this book. Again, it's called Essential Eschatology by John E. Phelan Jr. Phelan is spelled Phelan. Go ahead and grab that on Amazon or at your local bookstore. I would highly recommend that. And then another book that's sort of a modern day classic, and I know Marty this is actually Marty's favorite author, or favorite theologian, I believe, at least. And that is this book, Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright. Now, N.T. Wright has written, it's dozens of books. I don't even know how many it is now, but it's almost far too many. Like, it would take you a long time to read all of his books. But Surprised by Hope, I think it's probably his best book and probably one of his most impactful books ever. Get this book. If you hop on Amazon and get it used, you can get it for $4, including shipping. So go ahead and get Surprised by Hope. This book, and Marty would probably agree, we can talk about it on the next episode maybe, this book changed the way that I viewed my faith in general. So both of those books I think are pretty clutch, and I think you will enjoy them. So please pick them up. They're pretty great. All right, so that's the all the deep talk we have for this episode. Just a few, or one final announcement, really. We have a community cookout this Thursday, August 26th, at Dan and Linda Cohane's house. And that is going to be, again, at Dan and Linda Cohane's house. It's in Princeton. And the community cookouts, if you haven't been to one, are just kind of these chill events. You can bring like some meat or a side to throw on the grill or to just have there. And they're really just very chill. Everyone is welcome. Like you can come. It's a community thing. So please come and enjoy the time hanging out with people. It'll be outdoors. So if you're concerned about, the coronavirus, which I think we all are, it's outdoors, so hopefully that'll be helpful for that metric. So please join us this Thursday for the community cookout. I would be remiss if I did not mention, if you have learned something from this podcast, if you have benefited from it in any way, I would ask that if you are able, please give to Chaffin Church, because it's through your giving, your donations, that we're able to do everything that we do here, including, again, the podcast. So if you want to give to Chaffin Church, you can go ahead, go to chaffin.church/giving, or just chaffin.church, and you can click giving at the top right. You can text any dollar amount to 84321, and it'll take you through a process there to give to us. And then finally, if you're kind of old school about this, which is cool if you are, you can mail a check to 155 Shrewsbury Street in Holden, Massachusetts, 01520. Also, please don't forget to rate and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, any of your major podcasting apps should have us. And also, we are available on YouTube, which I know some of you are probably watching it on right now. So it's available in all those places. Check it out. All right, everyone, that's your good news for today. Now go and give some out.